Howdy, folks, and welcome back. Hope you're all blessed and doing okay out there. Well, for today's video, I present to you GE and EMD locomotives. Now, I've had this book for a while, and it's actually pretty cool and comprehensive, and tells a story about how these two companies came to be and how they became legendary. And I'm sure a lot of you can point on the front, yes, these are Norfolk Southern Heritage units. Two of my favorites, the New York Central one and the Pennsylvania Railroad one, an Ace and a Gevo. Pretty cool. Diesel's been around for a long time, since Dr. Rudolf Diesel developed it over in Europe, and England built the first diesel locomotive called the Deltic. A diesel locomotive works basically like this. A prime mover turns a generator that provides power to the traction motors to make the train go. So basically, it's a diesel-electric locomotive, but, well, everybody calls it a diesel locomotive, or diesel, however you want to pronounce it. There have been several models of diesel locomotives made throughout the years, all over the world, not just America. The primary builders in America were Plymouth, Davenport, Fairbanks Morse, General Motors, Alco, the American Locomotive Company, Lima, Baldwin, and some railroads even built their own engines like the Santa Fe. Diesel had a good run when it started off. However, though, the reason it came to be was because steam was being why can I talk? Steam was just getting to be too costly and expensive, and it took a lot of money to maintain a steam engine. So diesels came in, and a lot of people didn't think they'd be successful. One person working for, I think it was the Rio Grande Union Pacific, said he saw an Alco RS3 next to a Challenger. He said there's no way that little engine could do the job with the big steam engine. Unfortunately, he was wrong. It is sad that this killed off the steam engine. But steam engines are still around today. You know, there's about 2,000 or more in preservation. You can find models of steam engines, and you can read books and look at videos of them. And the same thing could be said about diesels. Diesels have had their run, come and go. Some diesels have been scrapped, sadly, and some have been destroyed in wrecks, but we still have a fair amount of diesels in preservation. Now, supposedly, the first railroad to own a diesel in the United States was the Santa Fe with a yard switcher. But actually, the first diesels were rail cars with motors in them, like the Doodlebugs and the McKean cars. This locomotive primarily focuses on the locomotive aspect of things. Alright, that's enough gabbing. I'm sure all of you want to see what's in this book, so let's take a look. Sorry guys, I love the history. I'm going to raise the tripod just a small hair. There we go. Well, if you don't recognize this picture, these are the Norfolk Southern Heritage units. Now you might be wondering, when did this book come out? Well, it's not as recent as you think. But it did come out before BNSF and CSX came up with their, well, I call BNSF's sticker units and CSX half heritage units. Table of contents, and of course we're going to talk about General Electric first. GE is the biggest maker of locomotives in America, although they're currently owned by Wabtec, and they don't just make locomotives, they also make appliances, jet engines, and medical equipment. They are a good company. GE Locomotives. Our first chapter is actually about electric locomotives. Yes, steam came first, electricity came second, and diesel came third, if you can believe that. Most people think it's the opposite. There's one of the E-Class electrics there for the New Haven. These were big and powerful engines. There's one of the early ones we had here in America. Now I looked online, and supposedly Europe had the first electric locomotive. People say no, America had the first electric locomotive in the 1890s. Which is correct? Tell me in the comments, guys, because I have no idea. There's a steeple cab, one of the early versions, had a very unique design to it. Electric power trains can get their power in many ways. The most common way is with this device called a pantograph, which connects to a wiring which is known as a catenary system. Another way is a third rail in the middle or side of the train, or 4 rails for that matter. And don't get me started on the dead-gum battery-powered locomotives. Those don't count. They're not as efficient anyway. There's a very successful locomotive, the S2 for the New York Central. Pretty interesting engine. There's an only looking electric right there. I'll be honest, guys, I'm not too familiar with electric locomotive types. I haven't done much research on them. I know a few things here and there, but not everything. There's one of the best ones built, the bipolar. The Milwaukee Road had quite a few of those, and I think there's one left. Okay, guys, I've got to cut the line. I cannot see this book. It's too dim. But I will try to fix the glare. That's much better. This engine was also very quiet. Pardon me. So there's some box cab types. Oh, there's one of my favorites, the Little Joe. The Milwaukee Road and the Great Northern had quite a few of these in their roster. Very interesting looking engines, too. There's a very tiny box cab right there on Canadian National. So yes, electric locomotives really did do their job. Oh, there's the EP5 on the New Haven. Electric trains are actually more popular overseas, it seems, than in the United States. This is probably the most successful electric locomotive ever built in America. The GG1, designed by Raymond Loewy. Just a beautiful engine altogether. I think the most interesting were the rectifiers. Those were quite something. These were very efficient, actually. A very interesting locomotive will be featured later on, but I'm going to go ahead and spoil it, is the P32 ACDM, built by GE for Metro North and New Haven. These engines have a pickup shoe on the rails, so they can go underground into Grand Central Terminal, because diesel and steam engines are not allowed to operate in the city of New York. There's a very small electric right there. There's a foreign locomotive. Yes, GE and EMD also build engines for the international market. So countries might order them, like Japan, Brazil, China, and Australia, to name a few. Here's one of the rectifiers again. Just an interesting engine altogether. There's the E60 that was built for Amtrak's Northeast Corridor trains. Now these engines were good, but also bad. You couldn't emu them. Like a steam engine, you had to have someone in each cab operating the dang thing, as one railroad man said. Here we go, early diesels. GE and Alco switchers. So yes, yard switchers were actually the first real form of dieselization in the country. They started doing small yard jobs. This talks about the first diesel right here. If you want to take a moment to pause and read about that, you can. I think it was the Santa Fe that owned the first diesel in America, or it was Chicago and Northwestern. There is one of the first ones built, number 1000. Tiny, and produced, I think, maybe about 500 horsepower. That's not a lot compared to today's high horsepower diesels, but still pretty darn cool. Now, one thing that makes GE and EMD different, well, there's a few things. They each have different looks, but also different sounds, and the locomotives work differently. The way a GE locomotive works is it has a chugging sound to it, like a steam engine. And when you start to throttle up, it doesn't take off like a rocket. It takes its time to start moving slowly and picks up speed. You'll hear about EMD when I get to that chapter of the book. GE Industrial Design. So yeah, GE just made small engines like their 45-tonners and their 25-tonners. And that's literally how much they weighed, and they were small but efficient. In fact, I think you can still find a handful today in operation. I like that one right there. That looks pretty cool. Alco also built yard switchers and their famous RS3. Oh, here we go. The turbines, or turbines if you prefer. Now these were here and there. It was a good idea and a concept. Much like steam experiments, like these right here with turbines, they tried experimenting with diesel turbine locomotives. These look like diesels, but they're steam engines, if you can believe that. Had a very unique design built by GE. The veranda turbines, or Union Pacific turbines as I like to call them, had their problems like the steam turbines. These produced about 8,500 horsepower. Well, this one did. Then this one, I think, produced about 7,000 horsepower. This one's the veranda turbine. They had a tender, and they burned a fuel or chemical that was disgusting. I forget the name of it, but it was very, very efficient. But these things were loud, and I mean loud. It was basically a jet engine on rails. They were so loud, in fact, they were banned in about 10 different towns in California where they ran. There's only one left, and it's this one right here, and it's on display at the Illinois Railroad Museum in Union, Illinois. They did try, though. Turbine power is a unique experiment, although it's not successful, and I'm not sure why they're trying to remake it. Here we go, the Universal line. So GE kind of took from Alco and made the Universal series, or U-boats as people call them, because, well, they kind of looked like U-boats. There's some of the foreign power right there again. I think that's over in Australia, or that's the Erie Road. I can't quite tell. So the U-boats had a variety to choose from, like the U-18 and the U-25. I indicated the model number, and the B stood for 2 axles, and the C stood for 3 axles, well, each per truck. And there's the cab. Looks like this one had a drum-style cab control console. A variety of rails, including Conrail and Norfolk Southern, and the infamous Penn Central bought them. Well, they didn't really buy them. They inherited them from the Pennsylvania Railroad, more than likely. This, to me, is the ugliest engine built by GE. The U-50C. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not a fan of that. I like big diesels, but that one is not on my list of favorites. A very interesting universal engine was the U-34CH built for New Jersey Transit. It was the first diesel locomotive built from the ground up specifically for commuter rail service. I'm not sure if it's in here, but it might be. Another thing that made diesels different from steam was the variety of paint schemes you could choose from. Mostly steam engines were black, and some of the streamliners were fancy like the 20th Century Limited or the Blue Goose or the Valley Flyer. But when the diesels came on, they went nuts with that. This is a very interesting engine. This is the P30CH, or Pooch unit, as people would call them for Amtrak. Some people hated them. Some people love them. I talked to an engineer who drove them. He said, compare it to everything else, it was the best engine he drove on Amtrak. I think they're pretty unique. I think that's the U-boat for NJT. Pretty cool. Just different paint schemes, and some were beautiful, some were ugly, but they all stood out in their own unique way. And as you can see, these engines have no ditch lights on them, and there are no wide cab units. The Dash 7. The Dash 7 came to be because, well, It's believed it was the 1970s, and that's why it was called the Dash 7 series. It was basically just a step up from the Universal series, only things are a bit more complicated and fancy. And I do believe these produced a bit more horsepower than their, well, previous counterpart did. These pictures are just amazing, guys. Okay. That thing, good golly. That is the BQ-23-7 that was built for family lines, I think, originally, and then CSX got them. This, to me, is the ugliest diesel engine ever built. It just don't look right in the front. The crews hated them. It looks too foreign for my taste. I like British diesels, but I don't like that. I don't think there's any left. They were all scrapped, and someone actually made a rendering on YouTube of what they may have looked like if other railroads bought them, including Santa Fe and BNSF. Luckily, it was all fictional in the game Trains. My goodness, can you imagine? Some of you might like it, and that's fine. GE in Estonia. Not sure what that means, but okay. There's two other railroads that are gone, the RF&P and WC. Yeah, the Dash 7s really took off, and I do believe for the most part they were 4-axle units. But there were some 6-axle units as well built, like the C30-7. I had one of those once. The cab of a GE chop nose is significantly short with the front of the hood. So that's one thing. The Dash 8s, which came out in the 1980s, were very successful engines. And there are quite a few to choose from. You had the B40-8, the B40-8W, the C40-8, and the C40-8W. Some of them were unique and went to different railroads, while others only had like one-offs built. Some railroads bought only one particular model instead of numerous ones. One example, and I hope it's in here, is the Santa Fe. Yeah, these are just amazing, these old paint schemes. I just love them. And I don't let that glare. Sorry, guys. The kid's probably stopping to wave to the engineer. Here we go. Now, which Dash 8 is this? There were 84 B40-8Ws built, and the Santa Fe was the first to buy them, and they bought all of them. Oh, there goes my chair again. Sorry, guys. I don't think BNSF has very many left, and recently one was painted back into its original Santa Fe paint scheme. There's still quite a few, though, running around. I think Genesee and Wyoming has a few. Santa Fe also bought the most C40-8Ws, I believe. I had one once an HO gauge, but I don't have it anymore. Now you look at this engine for Amtrak, and you think it's the same thing that the Santa Fe had. It looks similar, but it's different. This is the P32-8BWH. Try saying that 10 times fast. It's basically a passenger version of the Santa Fe Dash 8. Even Conrail got some of the wide cab Dash 8 locomotives. These cabs are actually a bit more safer than the chop nose cabs, but they were not quite crash-worthy, unfortunately. They had escape hatches on the top and better control consoles for operations. Super 7. And CSX, I think, has some of the wide cabs as well. I haven't looked into this in a long time, you guys, to be honest. It's a nice picture right there. Here we go, the Dash 9, or C44-9W. Now, a lot of you may be wondering, what do all these numbers mean? Well, in the case of what I've mentioned so far, in the Dash 8, Dash 7, and Dash 9, the C or B stands for the amount of axles per truck. The two numbers indicate how much horsepower it has. The 9 indicates the model number, or in this case, the fact it was built in the 90s. And the W means American Wide Safety Cab. The Dash 9-44CW produced 4,400 horsepower. I'm sure a lot of you may have played Microsoft Train Simulator back in the 90s. I did too, and yes, the Dash 9 was my favorite engine to drive on that train going up Moraes Pass. The Santa Fe bought the most of the Dash 9s out of all the other roads who actually purchased them, from what my research shows. And then BNSF happened, and they got their first game right there, the Heritage 1, which looks really neat. That's the cab, and they had desktop controls for the most part. Another railroad that made it stand out was Canadian National. They bought them, and this has an American cab, and they put their Canadian cab on theirs. AC traction. So GE built two unique engines, the AC 4400CW and the AC 6000CW. The numbers mean the amount of horsepower, and the C is 3 axles, while the W means wide safety cab. AC stood for alternating current. The AC-44s went to a variety of railroads. Oh, there's one of the demonstrator paint schemes. Very nice. However, though, the AC-6000 mainly went to CSX. The problem is it was too powerful for its own self. They would often break trains and knuckle couplers because of how powerful these things were. Crazy. But they got the job done, like everything else does. I'm not sure how many of these are left in existence or running the rails, but if you guys know, tell me in the comments below. They kind of look like Evolution Series engines, which you'll see here in a bit. CSX, though, profited mostly from the AC-6000. Another thing that may stand out was the steerable truck, which basically meant the wheels could pivot a bit more than a regular truck could. Genesis locomotives. So, like everybody else, GE wanted to get it on the passenger train market and developed the Genesis locomotive. Genesis means change, and it's also the very first chapter you see in the Bible. There were quite a variety made, including the EMD 103, the P40DC, the P42DC, and the P32ACDM. P stands for passenger, 42 stands for 4200 horsepower, and DC means it's a direct current locomotive. These engines have what was known as HEP, or head-end power. Before that was invented, a locomotive would have to keep its train at notch 8 like the F40PH, or keep rolling to keep it powered up. When this came along, things were much quieter, and the whole train could be powered from a generator inside the locomotive instead of the prime mover itself. Amtrak, Via Rail, Metro North, and a few other roads bought these and used them. The Evolution Series, the modern locomotives on GE today. These were developed back in the early 2000s to basically replace the Dash 9s. You have the ES44 AC and DC, the ES40DC, the ET44, the ES44C4, and a variety of others to choose from. Everybody bought these, and they're still on the rails today. They are modern, and they're Tier 4 compliant, but they may have to start doing Tier 5 compliant. These are efficient too and can go over 500 miles on 1 gallon of diesel fuel. There is a foreign Evolution Series locomotive. Yes, they sold to the foreign market. Pretty cool. There's a biography for GE. I forgot to mention too that GE started off in Erie, Pennsylvania with their plant, and now they make locomotives in Fort Worth, Texas. I don't know if the Erie plant is still there. I'm not sure if it's open. I'm not sure if it's a museum. Let me know, guys. I'm curious. EMD Locomotives. The main company that started it all with the dieselization age. Well, they're the ones that made it take off. EMD, Electromotive Division, or Electromotive Diesel, whichever you prefer, has been around a lot longer making diesels, I think. The Winston era. EMD got its start making yard switchers and eventually made beautiful streamliners. There's some of the early motor cars I told you guys about. This is known as a doodle bug because, well, it doodled down the track like a bug, they said. These produced very small amounts of horsepower, but they were pretty cool, and they could pull 2 cars behind them. They were used for short branch line train operations, much like the RDC cars were. There's a streamlined doodle bug right there. There's the Illinois Central's Blue Diamond and the Burlington Zephyr. These were 2 of the early successful diesel trains. They were light, they were sleek, they were fast. This one broke a record, making a train trip in 23 hours nonstop. Not bad. There's the Winston Prime Mover right there. Pretty cool. Now, EMD is a bit different than General Electric. And you'll see in a bit what I mean. One of these is actually being restored for operation. I think it's the Mark Twain Zephyr. The Burlington Zephyr is at the Science and Industry Museum in Chicago, and I think the Flying Yankee is still around as well. Those are other Zephyr trains that were made too. There's a early Santa Fe streamliner right there. Now, supposedly, I gotta wet my whistle. Now, supposedly, this was our first streamliner, the M10000, built for the Union Pacific in the 1930s. This train weighed, if you can believe it, only 18 tons. Very lightweight. And very fast, too. The Zephyr, I think, weighed about 20 tons. Still a light train. Some people say this was first. Some say this was first. Which is correct, guys? Tell me. One of the very early EMD streamliners was the EM1 right here, and there's our first chartered railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio. These were sleek and fast and powerful. And recently, the B&O Railroad Museum restored theirs to operational condition. There's another unique engine. This is the TA, and the Rock Island was the only railroad to have them. I think there were about maybe 4 or 5 built, but they look pretty cool. And there's one of the early yard switchers right there. I think of all the companies who made yard switchers, EMD made the most. I think this is some of their attempts at turbine power. I haven't looked into EMD turbine trains, to be honest, guys. Let's see. Lifetime of Tomorrow. Oh, boy. The 567 era. GE used a 7FDL prime mover with different amounts of cylinders. EMD had about 3 different prime movers. The first was the 567, and no, it did not produce 567 horsepower. It produced 1,750 to 2,000 horsepower. It has that classic train sound. There was turbo and non-turbo. Some of the best diesels built were made by EMD, including the E-Unit series and the F-Unit series. A variety of railroads bought these and put their paint scheme on them, and they were classy and beautiful. And this was back in the 1930s and 40s. Sadly, though, these trains didn't last, but still it's neat just to see how beautiful they are. And to be honest, BNSF needs to put that Great Northern paint scheme on one of your locomotives. It's so beautiful. This is a pretty cool picture right here showing a steam engine with a diesel with a walkway and a streamlined cowl unit. Well, car body unit. These are also nicknamed covered wagons, and, well, you see why. Okay, Katie. Well, there you go. Yeah, just a variety of roads bought these engines, and they really did get the job done. Some were used for freight service, but for the most part, these were built for passenger trains. The gimmick they used back then for passenger travel is that if you rode their train, you would ship freight with them. And it worked, for the most part. Ah, the Santa Fe War Bonnet F unit. Very beautiful. Quick side fact about the Santa Fe F units. Lino Trains, which has been around since 1900, was making F units back in the 1950s. The Santa Fe F3 was their best-selling train. The original was made for 18 years. They still make the Santa Fe F3, but it's not the same, unfortunately. But still, it's their best-selling train ever. Everybody wants a Santa Fe F unit. I have one in HO and an O gauge. Oh, here you go. This talks about the E units. Now, the E units were an upgrade from the F units. It was just basically a bigger engine, and they produced more horsepower. This one has 2 prime movers in it instead of 1. Yard switchers used them, along with some of the early hood units, like the GP7 and the GP9. You just don't get scenes like this very much anymore, folks. And it's been a while since I've looked at this book. I like it a lot. Well, that's a nice job, too, with the Burlington trains right there. Another company that built diesel products was the Bug Company, known for their passenger cars. They also built RDC cars, which is basically the same thing as a Doodlebug, but it had a cab at either end. Just so much to choose from in these engines. Just like there were so many trains to ride back in the old days. There's a very unusual engine. This is the BL2. I don't know really anything or much about it, but I do know that it had a unique look and design to it, and it was a nightmare to fix because you had to literally take the whole shell off to get to the prime mover. My goodness. What were they thinking with that thing? Oh, the Alaska State Railroad. I like that paint scheme on there. Here's some yard switchers and some of the high hood locomotives. The idea behind the high hood was to make it safer, but also make you feel like you're running a steam engine. But it didn't do much for visibility, unfortunately. I know. I've driven a high hood at a museum in California. Some of these were even used for small mainline passenger runs or small commuter trains. And this stuff was just so neat to see back then. I've seen pictures of train stations being busy back in the old days. And I've seen pictures of streamlined steam engines right next to diesels. It make a pretty cool painting. Oh my, we gotta talk about this one right here. So this was known as the aero train or jet train. And much like the turbines, they put a jet engine in here on rails. It looks like an automobile, as you can see, but this train had problems. It looked cool, it seemed like a nice idea, but they made a mistake. They built the passenger cars off of the frames of Greyhound buses, if you can believe that. They should have known that the suspension in a vehicle on a road is a lot different than on a rail car or a locomotive. They would bump people up and down and knock them around, and they were noisy and too much vibration. Luckily, there's a few of these in preservation, and I don't think they're ever going to run again. But still, it is a very beautiful looking train set altogether. Only a few roads bought these too. Just a variety of yard switchers like the SW1000, the NW2, the MP15s were also made by EMD. There's one of the six-axle units with the 567. There are only two high hoods made with 6 axles from EMD, as far as I can tell, that were built as high hoods, the SD7 and the SD9. Some of these engines were just the same look with different designs, and there were like little tiny features you had to look for that made them stand out. Some still run the rails today on tourist lines, short lines, and yard switching of Class 1 railroads. You just have to know where to go to find these things. Oh, the Wabash. I love that one. Pretty cool. I've driven an F unit myself at the same museum. I also drove a yard switcher. So as you can see, the 567 was a very amazing and successful prime mover. Even found its way into some of the early 6-axle diesels as well. But I think its most successful work was done in the F units and the E units. Oh, there's that glare again. Let me try this. There we go. Sorry guys if I missed that. I'm not paying attention. But I am trying. Give me some effort. Come on. The Southern is an interesting road because for the most part its hood units were always bought as high hoods. Even the SD40-2. I don't know why, but that's just how they did it. But whatever, I guess. It's interesting though. The 645 era. So this was the next step up from the 567. This one sounded more like a semi-truck than, well, anything else. Now, what makes an EMD locomotive different than GE? Well, they have 3 different prime movers to choose from, and they have a give and go attitude, so when you throttle up, it takes off. It doesn't take its sweet time to get going down the tracks. And the EMD prime movers, well, the 567 sounds classy, and the 645 sounds more like a semi-truck. This was also successful. Oh, there's one of their test engines as well. The 645 was using a variety of diesels, including the SD45, the SDP40F, the F45, the FP45, the F40PH, and some of the wide cab engines, but only a few. The SD45X is another one, which was a unique engine. Probably the worst one built was the SD50. What made that engine so infamous? They tried cramming a ton of electronics into a small space, and it didn't work very well. That is why GE became the dominant builder after that. Now this is probably the most unique engine built by EMD, the DDA40X. This had 2 645s in it, producing about, I think, 4,500 horsepower, give or take. These were big and powerful, and they were nicknamed Centennials because they were built in 1969, which marked the 100th year of the Golden Spike ceremony for the Transcontinental Road that took place in 1869. These worked along the mountains, I think in Cheyenne and the Wasatch Mountains. They basically were an upgrade from the big boys, but still pretty cool. There's one left that's operational. It's number 6936. I think, again, the 645's best work was in the passenger trains, such as this. This is the F40C built for Chicago's Metro. They're the only ones to buy that. Some of the art switchers even have the 645 implemented. I drove the art switcher with that prime mover, and it really had a get up and go kind of attitude, because when you throttle up, it takes up like a rocket. When you throttle up, it takes off like a rocket. There's a Canadian-style cab locomotive. When Canada bought these engines, they would put a wide cab on it and just call it a W, such as the GP38-2W or the ST40-2W. So it's Canadian style, basically. I think that's a foreign locomotive right there. Pretty cool, though. Kind of shows you what's inside the engine right there. Seeing engines like these, though, with chop noses, not wide cabs on the rails, is becoming very hard to do. Because on the long-haul trains, you mostly see the big wide cab engines. Kind of sad if you ask me. But you can still find these if you know where to look. Shortline roads use them for the most part. Another engine Now there's a very interesting engine. The ST40-2 became the most mass-produced engine by EMD even by today's standards. And the king of this was the Burlington Northern. They bought the most of them. What made it stand out was its long back porch. These are still around today. There is another F unit built with this, the F40PH. A lot of F40s used the 645 prime mover, and I think probably the most went to either Amtrak or Metra with their variety of F unit style locomotives. There's a whole bunch lined up. Even Via Rail had the F40s, but theirs were just a bit different. There's the F40PH M-2. Very interesting engine. Some people think it's ugly. I think it looks cool, actually. There's a BC Rail engine. That's their EMD locomotive with the 645. Just a variety to choose from. Wait. Rewind. I forgot to mention something about the F40PH. And someone's going to shove me if I don't mention this. So the F40PHs were built as passenger locomotives for Amtrak and a variety of other railroads in the country for commuter rail services, pretty much in every corner of the country. There's actually 2 in DFW operating on the Trinity Railway Express. The problem with these is they don't have an HEP generator. To keep the passenger cars powered, you had to literally keep the prime mover, that's what they call the engine, inside the locomotive, at notch 8. They were so loud, they were nicknamed screamers. A lot of engineers hated that because you couldn't tell what you were doing with it sitting at that. Some F40s were converted to have HEP, so the prime mover wasn't at notch 8, and the engineer and conductor could have a break on their eardrums for a bit. But still, the F40 is iconic and an amazing locomotive. I had to point that one out. And there's a foreign engine with the 645. Yeah, this book's pretty cool. You get to see some pretty amazing things in here. When Norfolk Southern came to me, they took over a lot of the high hoods and kept them as high hoods. There's the prime mover right there. These prime movers produced, I think, about 3,000 horsepower to 3,500 horsepower. I forget what that's called, but I've heard about it before. It looks kind of weird if you ask me, guys. There is the only electric built by EMD, if not one of the only ones. This is the Amtrak AEM7, or as people nicknamed it, the Silver Toaster. These are powerful, successful, and pretty cool looking engines. They've been replaced by the Siemens ACS64, but it looks better than the ugly Siemens Chargers, I'll give them that. The 710 era, EMD's current prime mover. The 710 was an upgrade from the 645 and produces more horsepower. It produces between 4,000 and 5,000 horsepower from what I've researched on. And a variety of engines use it. And it has a very unique sound. It's got kind of a haunting, ghostly sound. That's the best way I can describe the way I think it sounds, but that's just me. So, one of the first engines to use it was the GP60, like this one right here. And a lot of the well, stop for a sec. Let me rewind that. Here's another engine that was only bought by the Santa Fe first. The GP60M. There were over 100 units built of these things. Santa Fe bought them, and I'm not sure if they still have a variety on the BNSF roster. They might, but some I think went off to other railways as well. These are pretty cool engines and pretty unique. I'm sure some of you may be wondering, on these long train trips, where the engineers use the restroom. Well, it's actually right there in the nose of the engine, if you can believe that for the most part. Another successful locomotive was the F-59 locomotives, the F-59PH and the F-59PHI. And to me, these were the last good F units built by EMD. I don't like the F-125. It's ugly. This looks fine. The 710 did not have to be kept at notch date because these engines came with a HEP, so it really made things much quieter on the platform. Sorry, I'm starting a bit, guys. I'm getting kind of tired. Other engines that use this include the SD60 series, the SD70 series, the SD80 series, and the SD90 series of locomotives, as well as the SD75s that were built for the Santa Fe. Wide cab and chop noses also had them. I don't know of any high hoods that had a 710 in it. Now I'm thinking of the 645. Like I said, guys, I'm getting kind of tired. But still, this book is pretty cool. Now, I've read about that, but I forget what it is, but that works for the MBTA or the MTA, one of the two. There's a Conrail diesel. Very nice. There's Norfolk Southern. So if you're wondering if you're going to see a UP Heritage unit, well, there you go. The Mopac. One of my favorites, actually. There's the 4141 for George W. Bush, which is now in the library. And there's an Amtrak F-59 PHI. Huh, there's one of the foreign locomotives right there. Pretty cool. Now, from what I can tell, with the way locomotives are going, they're not buying anything new at the moment. Ah, the Caterpillar era. So Caterpillar and EMD collaborated to make a locomotive with a different kind of prime mover. Only a few were made and sold, and there was even an engine paint up in a pretty cool Caterpillar paint scheme. Anyway, with today's diesels, I'm being told that they're not really buying any new locomotives. There's no foreign one. Looks pretty cool. That in fact, they're refurbishing them. A new locomotive today cost about $4 million. To refurbish and upgrade cost about $2 million. Which actually I think is a better option. Oh, there's the Erie Heritage Unit right there, or Lackawanna, and KCS. R.I.P. KCS. I miss you. There's the bibliography for that. The index. And there's the back of the book. Oh. Yeah, there's a QR code. Huh. Well, there you have it. A very interesting book altogether, I must say. So yeah, diesel locomotives are still around. They're probably going to be here for many years to come, although they're being restored or refurbished. They are pretty neat, though, and I hope I get a chance to see more and maybe ride in some more. I'd like to go back and drive those trains again in California. Who knows? Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this video. So until next time, please be safe around trains. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, and may the good Lord bless all of you. Happy rails, guys, and I'll see y'all next time.